Deep Sea Embers Chapter 231 to 240. Chapter 231 Inches the reliable messenger Pearly. I flew into the store and stood on the handrail of the stairs with her breasts propped up, those green beady eyes scanning around the store. The big parrot with colorful tail feathers also flew into the store, landing on the counter next to Duncan, and jumped around with its head held high as if it was in his own home. With a stunned expression, Duncan looked at this guy who flew in from nowhere. The big parrot also raised its head, staring up at the man without finding anything wrong with this situation. Then after a long while, it suddenly flapped its wings, making a loud and harsh sound. "Ah. Pearly. Your name is Pearly?" Duncan asked curiously. He didn't expect this parrot to really answer him. After all, the essence of parrot talking was just mimicry of the tongue. Yet, not only did the parrot nod to him, but it also flapped its wings after hearing his question. "Pearly. Called Pearly." Duncan's expression froze for a moment, and he turned his head to look at I, who was looking at the first floor on the handrail of the stairs. "Where did you find this, friend?" The friend came from afar. I immediately flapped her wings, one eye looking at Duncan, the other eye drifting out the window. "Already here. No, vel, bjn.c ohm. What does she mean?" Nina asked curiously. After learning the secrets of the vanished and Duncan, Nina of course also knew that I could talk. She was surprised initially, but now she's calmed down and taking it well. Like everyone else, she had difficulty understanding the strange words popping out of the dove from time to time. Maybe it doesn't know where this parrot came from. Duncan used his imagination to translate for I, then turned his head to look at the parrot before glancing back and forth between the pair. I'm not against you making friends, but did you realize that you are different species? You should look for a dove friend. There is great tolerance among the vast stretches of rivers, for they all run into the ocean." The dove tilted her head and shouted this stunning phrase, "There is great tolerance." Duncan, as he talked with I, he often pondered about life and questioned himself. It's truly miraculous how a bird with such a pea brain could converse with him and vice versa. In fact, he wondered if they're even conversing on the same wavelength. Surely, Dog and Alice were also drawn to the commotion and came to the counter to see the fearless big parrot. Alice tried curiously poking the bird's wings, but it quickly dodged and glared at the miscreant doll for the offensive gesture. "What is it?" Alice asked Duncan. "It looks completely different from I." Shirley clarified, "Of course it's different. This is a parrot, and I is a dove." "What is a parrot?" Alice asked soulfully. "Can you eat it?" "No." Shirley shook her head and turned to the puppet. "Why do you always ask about eating when you don't even need to eat?" "I'm responsible for the cap, cooking for Mr. Duncan." The chatter continued around the counter, but Duncan remained pensive, observing the big parrot that called itself Pearly. He had a vague sense of familiarity with the bird as if he had seen it somewhere before. "Where are you from? Why are you here?" he suddenly asked. From their conversation earlier, Duncan sensed that this parrot could communicate with people, indicating that it was not of ordinary origin. "Pearly, go, send a message." The big parrot turned its head and tilted it to the side. "A messenger?" Duncan was taken aback, and his expression grew serious. "What kind of message?" The big parrot seemed to ponder for a moment before opening its beak to speak, but it was interrupted by I, who suddenly fluttered and shouted, "Make some fries." The big parrot was startled. "Ah, Pearly, make some fries." I landed in front of the big parrot and nodded seriously, "Make some fries." "Pearly, make some fries." The two birds communicated in this manner until Duncan had to intervene. "Stop. Quiet down. Pearly, what message are you delivering, and to whom?" The big parrot seemed stunned momentarily, hesitating before shaking its body repeatedly while uttering, "Make some fries." Duncan didn't say anything, realizing that no matter what message the parrot had before, it was forgotten now. As if trying to remember something important, the parrot suddenly jumped up and flapped its wings vigorously, shouting, "Tell the captain, tell the captain." While repeating, "Make some fries." It then flew towards the door and out of sight before anyone could react. Nina wanted to stop the parrot but couldn't move fast enough. So, in the end, she could only watch it go regretfully. On the other hand, Duncan became serious upon hearing Pearly shout to tell the captain. He suddenly remembered where he had seen the parrot before, in a certain cabin of the sea mist when the vanished and the sea mist overlapped. "Chase after that parrot. That's pretty much it. In a secluded reception room somewhere in the Cathedral of Planned, Valentine, an old bishop in civilian clothes, spoke to Tyrion, who was sitting across from him on a sofa. The vanished finally took the sun fragment away, prevented the creeping sunwheel from descending, and eliminated the impact of historical pollution on the city-state. Although we still can't be sure of your father's intentions. Tyrion's expression was subtle and stiff. He couldn't remember the last time he felt so bewildered. Of course, he could understand every word the old bishop said, but even in his wildest dreams, he never imagined it would happen like this. Did the vanished really leave like that? Did someone come to rescue them? Tyrion spoke in disbelief. It took away the sun fragment, and then what? Is that all? Didn't do anything else? Valentine and Vanna exchanged a look, both showing helplessness and hesitation in their expressions. It was still hard to say the phrase, "Your dad robbed half of the city's fries," in front of Tyrion. Nothing else. Valentine hesitated. I know you are confused, Mr. Tyrion. We are as confused as you are, and if you don't even know what your father wants to do, then we don't know either. Since a century ago, he could not be considered my father. Tyrion slowly shook his head and said in a deep voice. It's just an imitation that was torn apart by subspace and then put together by clumsy means. There is no trace of humanity in that empty body. Tyrion stopped abruptly, suddenly remembering the seconds when the vanished and the sea mist overlapped and passed each other. He thought of the cold and distant words he heard, "I'm busy." The big pirate hesitated. Inside that shell on the vanished, was it really inhuman? The voice that spoke to him at that time, and the aura he felt from that figure, was it really just an echo of the empty frenzy of subspace? As Tyrion was distracted, the young Inquisitor's voice interrupted his thoughts. The question of whether Captain Duncan has human nature is exactly what we will discuss next. Huh? Tyrion looked at Vanna suspiciously. What does that mean? Actually, Vanna hesitated, then turned her head to exchange a look with Bishop Valentine before nodding slightly. We have communicated with your father more than once recently. Matters related to the vanished were classified information, especially the conversation with Captain Duncan, which should not have been disclosed to anyone outside the church. But Tyrion's identity was so special that these questions were clearly no longer a problem. Communication. You and my father. Tyrion was really taken aback and almost got up from the couch. This is a very bad joke if it is. Please calm down. This is a very serious question. No one would joke about this kind of thing after the city-state has almost collapsed. Vanna looked at Tyrion calmly, then paused slightly. Strictly speaking, I had a few exchanges with your father, and according to my observations, Captain Duncan no longer seems to be as described in the records. Tyrion noticed the other party's solemn attitude, causing him to quickly calm down and show an extremely serious expression. Miss Inquisitor, how did you establish communication? Why did he find you? And what did he say? It started as an accident. No, now that I think about it, it may also be your father's intentional arrangement. Vanna collected her thoughts and recalled as she spoke. I came into contact with the flame he left behind and made a connection with it. As for why he chose me, unfortunately, no one knows. Vanna omitted the details of her imprint, and contamination could not be removed, instead vaguely summed up the process as making contact, and then told the pirate captain, in front of her, the details of several exchanges with Captain Duncan. The man who theoretically knows Duncan Abnomar best. Chapter 232 inches Tyrion's memory. After listening to Vanna's story, Tyrion fell silent for a moment. Without witnessing things in person, he couldn't analyze from her words alone what plans the returned ghost from subspace had or how he had changed, but one thing was certain. The Captain Duncan Vanna described was not the crazy monster that the sea mist had encountered half a century ago. However, the man didn't quite resemble the great explorer father he remembered from a century ago either. Captain Tyrion, Vanna suddenly spoke, interrupting Tyrion's thoughts. What do you think? I can't believe this is really happening, but since it has already happened, I can only admit it for the time being, Tyrion said thoughtfully, furrowing his brows. From your description, it seems he is in a state of clear thinking, sanity, and with humanity, but his power, that cursed flame, is correspondingly more powerful. Vanna nodded in agreement. I don't know if that green flame is a curse, but it is undoubtedly powerful. That flame is related to subspace, Tyrion said, and he acquired this strange power after falling into subspace, so it's no problem calling it a curse. So, that flame is more powerful than what you saw half a century ago, which means Captain Duncan's connection to subspace has become deeper, old Bishop Valentine pondered. He did not break free from the influence of subspace but fell deeper. However, he also recovered in the process. This is not consistent with what we know about subspace. Tyrion shook his head. The believers of Lahem often say, Valentine continued, the only thing we know about subspace is that we never know enough about it. For thousands of years, no person or thing from the real dimension can enter subspace and return to this world. No one knows what is really in subspace except for some indirect observational records and the words written by the mad scholars of the ancient kingdom of Crete in madness. Our summary of the rules of that place is meaningless in itself. The learned old man paused, then sighed. So much so that we can't even be sure whether subspace is a place or not. 1600 years ago, the mad scholar Behrman was swallowed by invisible forces in full view of everyone because he read an ancient scroll. Before he disappeared, he shouted, "Subspace is a shadow on the back of the world," and his words at that time drove 142 witnesses to madness. But with the madness of those witnesses as a sacrifice, this information has become the biggest step in our understanding of subspace in thousands of years. Until now, scholars have tried to construct a theoretical model of subspace based on Behrman's dying cry, and your father, not only did he really enter that place, but now he is even returning to our world saying, "That's right, every year of research, every year of death, then the dead are quickly replenished to continue this study, so I really admire the desperate scholars of the Academy of Truth, completely in the sense of admiration." Tyrion sighed and shook his head. So, now my father may have become a valuable sample. A sample that has really been to subspace and is sensible and communicative. Ads by PubFuture. Valentine spread his hands and said, "This is just wishful thinking. We cannot expect Captain Duncan to cooperate with mortal research. Moreover, even if he now has a reason, we cannot assume that his reason is biased towards the human side. If he is a sane subspace invader, it will be far more terrifying than those chaotic projections that cannot think." Tyrion remained silent for a while, lost in deep memories and thoughts. Eventually, he spoke up abruptly. He exhibited signs of anxiety before his last expedition. In fact, he had been anxious for a long time and made extensive preparations for something ominous. Valentine and Vanna exchanged serious looks. It had been a century since anyone had heard these crucial secrets from the descendants of Captain Duncan. Unable to contain her curiosity, Vanna asked, what was he anxious about? And why was he preparing? He believed it was the end of the world, Tyrion replied calmly. Valentine frowned. The end of the world. I know it may sound like the rantings of doomsday prophets that we hear every year, but it's what the greatest explorer of his time was concerned about 100 years ago, Tyrion explained. Tyrion sighed and continued, after Lucretia and I took over the command of the Sea Mist and Bright Star, he would occasionally bring it up. He seemed to believe that something like a countdown or a time limit was ticking away in our world. Although the earthly world appeared to be stable and peaceful on the surface, this countdown was drawing closer to its end. And when the time came, everything would quickly collapse and end. He believed that our era was the last part of the countdown. Valentine furrowed his brows again. To be honest, I don't think our world is stable. But in my father's words, he called the current earthly world the last pastoral age, Tyrion replied. Vanna pondered momentarily and asked, so, to find a way to stop this countdown, he went to subspace. No, he wanted to find Anomaly 000. He believed that Anomaly 000 could end the distortion of the world and halt that countdown. To do so, he had to pass through the eternal curtain at the end of the world. Ads by PubFuture. Valentine was taken aback. He passed through the curtain of eternity. Yes, but I can only confirm that he did enter the fog, and I don't know if he actually succeeded in penetrating it, Tyrion said. He refused to be accompanied by any escorts, and all I can confirm is that he returned alive but insane. As for falling into subspace, that's what happened after that incident. Valentine and Vanna fell silent, and after a while, Vanna spoke up again. Did he find the so-called Anomaly 000? You know, in theory, there is no such anomaly or vision numbered 0. He knew that and did not find it, Tyrion replied softly. So, I always thought that he might have been unstable even before he decided to search for Anomaly 000. Vanna thought for a moment and asked, "Do you know what your father originally thought was the reason for the existence of the countdown in the world? When did he realize this? Was it due to contact or did he discover something?" Tyrion hesitated momentarily before speaking uncertainly, "I'm not sure. It was too long ago, but I vaguely remember that my father received several visitors on the Vanished and talked with them all night long. He first mentioned the apocalyptic issue to us after that day." Valentine's expression became grim as he pressed for more detail. How many people did he receive? What kind of people were they, and what was the situation at the time? Tyrion spoke slowly. "They all wore gray-white coarse cloth robes and were barefooted. From my memory, the group appeared thin and scrawny, as if they had traveled long distances and worked hard. They came aboard during a voyage like they had made an appointment with my father in advance. They talked throughout the night, and then my father said they had left in the morning. But I didn't see the visitors go. It was as if they had disappeared into thin air." Valentine's expression changed as he asked, "The Enders? It sounds like them." "Your Excellency, after living for a century, I know the Enders well," Tyrion replied, shaking his head. "But these people were different. They were sensible and friendly, without any trace of madness." Sensible and friendly. Valentine's surprise was evident. "I've never heard of such a thing. Did they have any other distinguishing characteristics?" After a few minutes of thought, Tyrion remembered, "One of them spoke to me. I can't recall exactly what he said, but I remember that they called themselves lowly seekers. Also, one of them wore a talisman with a hexagonal emblem and a fragmented cross in the center. He wouldn't let me touch it and said it was their way of seeking guidance and shelter." Tyrion paused and drew the emblem on a piece of paper, hesitating slightly as he sketched the cross. Vanna frowned at the drawing and asked her peer, "Do you know what this is? You're more knowledgeable than me." Valentine studied the pattern for a while before shaking his head. "I've never seen it before. It doesn't resemble any religious symbol or classical city-state emblem that I know of. No-vel-b in .c ohm." Vanna murmured in frustration as she gazed at the emblem, which appeared to be reflected in her eyes along with a faint green flame that was barely visible. Chapter 233 Inches the Curse of the Family. After Bishop Valentine put away the piece of paper with the unfamiliar emblem, he remarked, "None of us are familiar with this pattern. It's possible that it comes from an ancient era or a secret society that remains undisclosed." He set the paper aside and added, "We can check the archives to see if there are any corresponding records, and I'll reach out to my academic colleagues to see if they can provide any insights into this matter." Turning her attention back to Tyrion, Vanna inquired, "Did your father exhibit any unusual behavior before he spoke with those strange visitors? For instance, did he acquire any mysterious texts or visit secretive places?" Tyrion shook his head as he responded, "It's hard to say. You have to understand that a century ago, my father was one of the most renowned explorers in the world. Dealing with strange artifacts and hidden places was part of his everyday life. My sister Lucretia and I were just starting to learn from him and explore his collection, so we didn't have many opportunities to discover more." He paused for a moment, letting out a soft sigh. "And back then, neither of us considered the consequences of what was to come. My father often received various unusual guests, so those strange visitors were not necessarily out of the ordinary. By the time we realized that something was wrong though, almost a year had passed since that secret conversation, so there was no way for us to investigate anything further." Vanna nodded in agreement, but their conversation was abruptly interrupted by a loud chime and siren that emanated from the window. Bishop Valentine looked up and observed that the sun had set, casting a faint shadow of the world's creation in the sky. "The twilight bell strikes," he remarked before suggesting that they conclude their discussion. Turning to Tyrion, he offered the hospitality of the cathedral for the night, with dinner and undisturbed rooms provided. "Thank you then." Tyrion expressed his gratitude. "I plan to stay in this city for a few more days. I did live here briefly a century ago, so I'm interested in seeing what changes took place." "Of course," Valentine smiled, "the sea mist is already a friend of Planned, and we are always ready for friends. You can stay here as long as you want." "You are welcome to stay here as long as you want," Bishop Valentine warmly responded, acknowledging the sea mist's relationship with Planned. Vanna stood up from the couch and offered to show Tyrion to his guest room after gathering the sailors from the room nearby. As Tyrion and Vanna walked towards the guest room, Tyrion expressed his surprise. I never thought the Inquisitor would personally escort us. It's quite an honor for a mere pirate like me. Vanna turned around with a smile and corrected him. You're not just a pirate. Your lineage is impressive. Son of Captain Duncan, the Frost Queen General, and the Sea Mist Fleet Commander. If all the pirates on the Boundless Sea are of your caliber, then we won't need any city-state authorities. Ads by PubFuture. Pirate is simply a convenient cover that allows me to cause trouble for certain individuals in the cold sea. Some people even prefer to label me as such to increase the bounty on my head, giving them the illusion of being useful, Tyrion explained nonchalantly. But as you mentioned, those titles belong to the past, Miss Inquisitor. After a moment of silence, Tyrion added, I've never shared so much about my past with an outsider before. I hope you understand. Vanna nodded in understanding. I can imagine it must be difficult, she said sympathetically. But sometimes, in order to find a solution, we must confront the things that make us uncomfortable or uneasy. And that is what we are trying to do here in Planned. Uncover the truth and find a way to help your father. Tyrion nodded in agreement. I understand. Thank you, Miss Inquisitor, for your understanding and willingness to help. As the man spoke, he glanced at Vanna's eyes but quickly averted his gaze. Again, he felt a faint yet palpable pressure that was even stronger than what he had sensed earlier on the dock. Then recalling the recent experience of the Inquisitor communicating with that man, Tyrion suddenly got some terrible ideas of where this discomfort came from. Vanna picked up on Tyrion's unusual behavior and asked him directly, Captain Tyrion, you seem a bit tense. Is there something that's making you nervous? No, Inquisitor, Tyrion responded by hesitantly shaking his head. You mentioned having communicated with my father multiple times. Did he, by any chance, impart any gifts or powers to you during those interactions? Vanna abruptly halted her footsteps at this remark. Why do you ask this? Tyrion quickly clarified, recognizing that his question might be overwhelming for someone as devout and resolute as Vanna. I don't intend anything else, he explained. I simply wanted to bring to your attention the power that my father brought back from subspace. It's highly unusual and challenging to remove, and it's extremely polluting, much like other chaotic erosion from subspace. If you accidentally delve too deep. Vanna took a deep breath and expressed her gratitude. Thank you for reminding me, she said sincerely. However, in reality, Vanna couldn't help but feel that Tyrion's reminder had come a bit too late. The influence of Captain Duncan seemed to be more severe than anyone had anticipated, and now all she could do was hope that he would actually knock when he sought her out. Although Tyrion was unsure of what was going through Vanna's mind, he sensed a palpable awkwardness in the air. However, the discomfort was short-lived, as Vanna took the initiative to break the silence. I have a question, she said. Your father mentioned a countdown before he lost his sanity. Do you know anything more about it? Did he mention any other details? Ads by PubFuture. As Vanna posed her question, her mind couldn't help but recall her previous communication with the goddess of storms, Gomona, and the cryptic message the deity had conveyed to her. Time is limited and about to reach the critical limit. The sentence that Vanna couldn't comprehend at the time now seemed to be intricately linked to the countdown mentioned by Tyrion. Tyrion locked eyes with Vanna, and the two remained silent for a few moments. Eventually, Tyrion spoke in a deep voice. During his last moments, he said something to Lucretia. He said, our world is just a pile of extinguishing embers. As the corridor came to an end, Tyrion turned to Vanna and expressed his gratitude. Thank you for leading the way. I'd like to spend some time alone with my subordinates for a while. Vanna nodded in understanding. Of course, I understand. Please feel free to reach out to me if you need anything, she replied before heading back the way they came. As the door closed behind her, Tyrion felt a wave of relief wash over him, now that the surroundings had quieted down. As Tyrion thought back to his conversation with the Inquisitor, he couldn't help but feel the pressure he had sensed from the lady. It was a palpable sensation that left him feeling uneasy. If he had to relate it to anything he experienced, it would be the sensation he got whenever his father gazed down at him. The memory sent shivers down his spine, and he couldn't help but wonder what it all meant. Captain, is everything all right? A trusted sailor looked at his boss with concern. You seem tense ever since we landed. I'm all right, Tyrion reassured his sailor with a wave before casually walking over to a nearby table. Could you bring the items over? Without delay, one of Tyrion's trusted sailors approached the table, carefully placing a suitcase from the sea mist on its surface. With a key, Tyrion unlocked the case and revealed its contents. In the suitcase was a complicated lens apparatus comprising multiple small lenses and curved connectors, featuring a large crystal ball at its center. "Watch the door. Don't let others disturb me," Tyrion instructed his men to keep watch at the door and ensure that he's not disturbed. It was only after several sailors had departed that he directed his attention towards the crystal ball. Then, delicately adjusting one of the lens angles, he murmured the name, Lucretia. Ads by PubFuture. Eventually, there was a slight tremble in the lens assembly, and the crystal ball positioned at the center started emitting a glimmer, coupled with an unsettling sound, until the vague outline of Lucretia materialized within the crystal ball, saying, "I am present." "Why is the image so blurry?" Tyrion furrowed his brows. "Where are you currently located?" I'm at the border." Lucretia's voice crackled through the crystal ball amidst the static. "The surrounding environment is causing more interference, and I'm trying to adjust. Is it better now? Can you hear me clearly?" Eventually, the interference dissipated, and Lucretia's form gradually became more distinct. "The environment around me has shifted slightly, and the spirit realm is creating an unusual disruption in reality," the voice from the crystal ball explained. "Is everything all right, brother? The bright star is traversing through turbulent waters. If this isn't urgent." "I'm currently in planned." Tyrion got straight to the point. "The sea mist suffered significant damage during the battle with the Vanished, and the situation in this city-state seems unsettling." The figure on the other end of the crystal ball was taken aback by the news. After a few moments, Lucretia's slightly anxious voice spoke up. "Did you truly come across the Vanished? Are you safe now?" "Frankly, I was beaten up, but it's okay now," Tyrion said in a low voice. "The problem is, his situation seems a little wrong." "His situation isn't right," Lucretia frowned. "You met him up close." Then, Lucretia opened her mouth, seeming hesitant. "So this time you saw our father?" "Not exactly. In all honesty, I took a bit of a beating, but I'm fine now," Tyrion whispered. "The issue is, there's something off with him. His situation isn't right." Lucretia furrowed her brow. "Did you meet him in person?" "Yes. Novel.b in .com. In that case," Lucretia hesitated before speaking up. "So, you met our father this time?" "Not exactly." Chapter 234 Inches Harmonious Family. Tyrion found it challenging to clarify to his sister the peculiar transformations that had occurred with their father, and his extraordinary actions in planned. "I sense he's not the same erratic and disorderly subspace entity he was half a century ago. Now there appears to be a sense of humanity and rationality within him. However, it feels unfamiliar to me." Tyrion spoke with a furrowed brow. "Although he still recognizes me, I'm uncertain whether he remains the same father we've always known. The transformations are significant." The woman with black hair on the opposite end of the crystal ball remained silent for a few moments before commenting. "Well, at least it sounds like an improvement from what it was like half a century ago." Novel.b in .com. "You can say it like that. Half a century ago, I stood at the bow of the sea mist and gazed upon that silhouette, wishing it wasn't him, and now I'm face to face with him again, only to wonder if it's truly him. Either way, the Vanished hasn't caused as much devastation as it did before." Lucretia remained silent momentarily, pondering over something before bringing up a topic. "Do you recall what I informed you during our last conversation?" Looney unexpectedly broke down and mentioned that the old master was searching for me. "It appears that our father is genuinely plotting something." "What could he be planning?" Tyrion furrowed his brow. "Is he intending to resume his previous unfinished expedition? Or perhaps reassemble the Vanished fleet?" "I'm unsure," Lucretia admitted. Suddenly, an obscure interference materialized in the crystal ball, and several automated magical devices behind Lucretia appeared to malfunction, emitting a faint crackling noise. A group of automatic magic puppets scurried over to investigate the equipment, appearing flustered. "What's happening over there?" Tyrion became apprehensive. "Do you need to tend to the equipment behind you first?" "Don't worry, the puppets can handle minor issues, and they're insignificant compared to the major storm brewing at the border," Lucretia reassured Tyrion calmly without glancing back at the frenzied commotion. "I'm almost through this unstable sea." "What are your plans for exploration?" Tyrion asked. "This time you won't directly rush into that fog, right?" "I must remind you, the border is not a safe place. I was tracking something, and it suddenly emerged near the border with tremendous energy, plunging into the sea, but the onboard equipment failed to capture its exact image, Lucretia explained composedly. Don't worry, I'm still within the eternal curtain and haven't ventured into the dense fog yet. Once I locate that object, I'll forward you the image. If it's something that can be extracted, I'll cut a piece for you as a souvenir. Tyrion waved his hand dismissively upon hearing this. No need, I don't want any ominous souvenirs sent my way, and I'd rather catch a few peaceful hours of sleep. Ads by PubFuture. Lucretia didn't seem to mind and continued casually, by the way, did you purchase a spirit lens for me? Tyrion was taken aback, and his voice sounded a bit unnatural as he replied, it might have to wait a few days. You know, that item requires some luck to obtain. Did you forget? Lucretia inquired. Of course not, I haven't forgotten. Several suppliers I know are currently out of stock, and the 4 major churches do have the goods, but the procedures to obtain them are too complicated, Tyrion explained. You did forget, didn't you? Lucretia repeated her question. I'm doing my best, Tyrion said solemnly. There must be another way to acquire it without resorting to theft. It appears that you did forget, Lucretia responded calmly by nodding, as if she had already anticipated the situation. It's all right, I understand you're occupied, and it's difficult to request such a favor. Tyrion's face visibly relaxed upon hearing his sister's understanding tone. However, he became tensed again when he heard the second half of the sentence from the opposite side of the crystal ball. Then I'll ask the day after tomorrow. Tyrion. The burly pirate wiped his forehead, appearing as though he had something to say, but before he could utter a word, the sound of flapping wings emanated from the window, interrupting his movements. This was followed by the sound of pecking against the glass. Wait a minute, something is happening on my end, Tyrion said hurriedly, his expression turning to one of surprise as he looked up. Pearly, he exclaimed. Tyrion immediately rose from his seat and opened the window, allowing the large, colorful-tailed parrot to enter. Pearly flapped its wings and landed on the table, squawking loudly, Pearly. Tyrion settled back into his seat at the table, eyeing the large parrot suspiciously. What are you doing here? He questioned. Did you escape from the ship? Or did Aiden send you? Ah, Aiden sent Pearly. The large parrot spread its wings and exclaimed, bobbing its head back and forth. Pearly has a message, an important message. Aiden said, it continued squawking. Ads by PubFuture. The large parrot appeared to be struggling for a moment, causing Tyrion to look at it with bewilderment. After a prolonged pause, the parrot suddenly screeched out loudly, to Tyrion's surprise, make some fries. Make some fries. Tyrion. Lucretia, on the other side of the crystal ball, also heard the commotion on Tyrion's end, and her voice sounded doubtful. Brother, is Pearly hungry? No, Pearly was supposed to convey some other information, but it appears that the message was intercepted, Tyrion reacted promptly. As the owner of Pearly, he was well acquainted with the parrot's behavior and Aiden's personality. His expression quickly became grave. Pearly, has something happened aboard the ship? The large parrot tilted its head to look at its master, repeating the phrase, make some fries, several times with no apparent meaning. Suddenly, it stopped and appeared to recall something, and then it excitedly screeched out, blood compass. Tyrion furrowed his brow slightly, blood compass. Point to the city-state. The large parrot flapped its wings vigorously and shouted excitedly, blood compass points to the city-state. Tyrion was taken aback for a moment, and then he reacted swiftly. His expression changed, and he looked up at the crystal ball before him. Lucy, he's. Brother, you must leave planned immediately, Lucretia spoke urgently from the other side of the crystal ball, not waiting for Tyrion to finish. This could be a trap. Tyrion remained frozen and unresponsive to his sister's warning. Instead, he sat there motionless like a statue, his gaze fixed straight ahead. Brother, Lucretia sounded puzzled. Did you not hear me? Lucy, he's. Tyrion's voice trailed off as he broke the silence. Opposite of me, he finally whispered. The voice from the crystal ball fell silent. Across the table from Tyrion, a decorative mirror with an oval frame was suspended in midair, surrounded by a faint green flame. Within the flickering of the flame, a majestic figure stood within the mirror, calmly observing him on the other side. First and foremost, this is not a trap, the figure within the mirror began to speak, and I am as surprised as you are for being here. The second thing is that I am finished, so now I'm here to see what you're doing. Tyrion remained silent and motionless while Lucretia grew increasingly uneasy on the other side of the crystal ball. She could not see what was happening on Tyrion's end, which added to her anxiety. Finally, she whispered, "Is he really there?" Tyrion's expression remained impassive as he reached for the box on the table and rotated the crystal ball and lens group towards the other side. "Say hello to father," he said flatly. As Tyrion made his move, Lucretia's voice became more urgent, and she spoke more loudly. "No need, there's no need to turn around," she said hastily. Unfortunately, it was already too late as the crystal ball and lens group rotated, exposing the image of their father. In addition, Duncan was also peering through the mirror, observing the woman inside the crystal ball. This was their initial encounter, and within his own mind and body, he had no recollections of having a strong relationship with the other person except for a vague and sentimental impression. He experienced a similar sensation when he encountered Tyrion before, but now, standing before Lucretia, there appeared to be another emotion, guilt and remorse. Is it because the father owed her more? Or is it because of the last gift that couldn't be delivered? Duncan didn't know which. After all, he's only assuming this identity for the moment and not actually the real Duncan. "It's been a while, Lucy." He gives the lady a nod as a formal greeting. Lucretia's countenance was typically composed and enigmatic, earning her the Sea Witch nickname. However, the current circumstance seemed to baffle her more than even the unpredictable border. She nervously stood there as though she was transported back to the distant past, to the afternoon when she first destroyed her father's navigational equipment. It's been a while," she stuttered in response. Subsequently, the atmosphere in the room lapsed into a melancholic silence, with Duncan wordlessly gazing at the two siblings before him. This tacit pressure appeared to travel through the crystal ball and into the vast expanse of the boundless sea. Lucretia struggled to find a topic to alleviate the tension, but after some hesitation, she eventually blurted out, "The frame suits you rather well." Duncan. I am referring to the patterned frame. It matches your personality quite well," Lucretia hastily clarified, sensing the need to explain herself. "It exudes a sense of restraint and modesty, which suits you perfectly." Especially when you're hanging on the wall." Duncan was dumbfounded. "What exactly are you trying to say?" Finally, Lucretia shifted her gaze away from Duncan and looked towards Tyrion as if seeking his guidance. "Help me," she mutters. Tyrion sighed and pushed the suitcase containing the crystal ball aside. He then rose to his feet and approached the frame. "What brings you to us?" Chapter 235 Inches across time and space. Separated by a mirrored layer and flickering flames, Duncan closely observed Tyrion and Lucretia's reactions throughout their entire encounter. He discerned their unease, vigilance, and mild apprehension. Though the atmosphere was far from ideal for a family reunion, Duncan had expected this outcome and didn't mind. Meeting Tyrion on his terms fulfilled his purpose for the day, and establishing a foundation now could avert unanticipated conflicts in the future. He was also glad to find Lucretia present. Moments before, Duncan had eavesdropped on their conversation from behind the mirror without their knowledge. He learned that his earlier attempt to contact the siblings using the twin doll, Nilu, had not been futile. Although he received no feedback, Lucretia's side had shown activity, granting him unexpected information and insights. Composed, Duncan maintained his usual calm demeanor, scanning Tyrion and the crystal ball beside him. "A father doesn't need a special reason to seek his children," he said. Tyrion's eyes briefly widened before he regained control. Speaking softly, he continued to eye Duncan suspiciously through the mirror. "You should be aware that this is the cathedral. Even you should tread carefully so as not to offend the gods who dwell in this sacred place," he warned. "No-vel-b-in.com. "Yes, this is the cathedral," Duncan replied calmly, "and I have witnessed it burn down and rebuild from its fragmented past. If the goddess behind this church is watching, she owes me a thank you." Tyrion found himself at a loss for words, a familiar sensation when conversing with his father. A century ago, before the Abnomar name was cursed, Tyrion had always struggled to articulate himself before his father, who was perpetually dignified and engrossed in enigmatic and ominous affairs. "Has your sanity finally escaped the influence of subspace?" inquired the Sea Witch from the crystal ball. As she had done 100 years ago, she eased the tension between her father and brother as the middle person. "Have you returned this time to continue your exploration plans?" Duncan glanced at Lucretia, panic hidden beneath his calm exterior. He aimed this critical meeting at laying the foundation for his future plans, cover or clarify the many flaws he might reveal, and, if possible, normalize the changes involving him and the vanished. Fortunately, the man had prepared a draft in advance. Subspace has left a deep impact on me, and perhaps I'll never fully shake its influence, he spoke slowly, modulating his speech and expressions. I can't remember many things clearly, even my understanding of the real world. I'm attempting to rediscover the world, and knowing you exist, I think this may be a crucial step in rebuilding my cognition. Ads by PubFuture. He paused before adding, but as you said, Lucy, at least, my sanity has returned. This was the most effective statement he could devise to resolve hidden dangers and prepare for the future. To maintain the vanished stability, he had to play the role of Captain Duncan. Even with a tacit agreement with Goathead, he couldn't abandon this identity, so he had to continue this performance in front of Lucretia and Tyrion. However, no matter how clever the act, there would always be loopholes. And given that he knew almost nothing about the siblings, the most effective solution would be preparing a scapegoat in advance, specifically, a scapegoat connected to subspace. In any case, all the world's evils were linked to subspace, a scapegoat among countless others. Adding one more from his perspective wouldn't hurt. The rest was left to Tyrion and Lucretia's brain to supplement. Upon hearing Duncan's words, Lucretia in the crystal ball appeared visibly startled. She seemed to be intently observing her father's face for any signs of insincerity, while Tyrion, who stood beside her, asked after a brief pause, "So, your actions in planned were merely to save this city-state?" Duncan smiled, replying, entirely out of goodwill. "But the head bishop and inquisitor in the city don't seem to trust this," Tyrion said in a deep voice, "particularly the inquisitor. She is extremely cautious around you." "I can tell," Duncan nodded. "She tried to cleave me twice in a row, but failed both times." Tyrion was at a loss for words. Unfazed by Tyrion's silence, Duncan shifted his gaze to his daughter, in the crystal ball, seemingly asking nonchalantly, "Is Looney with you?" "She's here," Lucretia nodded before motioning to her side. Soon, a clockwork figure dressed as a maid appeared in the crystal ball. Duncan was surprised by the clockwork puppet in front of him, as it didn't seem to fit with Nilu. "Why does she look like this?" Ads by PubFuture. "I made a few modifications to Looney," Lucretia explained, wearing a somewhat awkward expression while trying to guess her father's reason for changing the subject. "Why did you suddenly ask about her?" "I found Nilu," Duncan said softly, "in a doll shop." "You didn't take her back then, so she was never sold." Lucretia couldn't help but exclaim, "Ah!" Distant memories seemed to fill the sea witch's mind, and her expression grew complex. Duncan noticed the subtle change in her expression and decided that it was enough for now. Further probing might have an undesirable effect. "I'm leaving," Duncan announced through the mirror, signaling his departure. Both Lucretia and Tyrion were slow to react, and Tyrion, in disbelief, asked, "You're leaving?" "I still have unfinished business," Duncan responded nonchalantly, his gaze resting on Lucretia. "I'll hold on to Nilu for now in your stead. If the chance arises in the future, I'll return her to you." As he finished speaking, his image rapidly faded, and the green flames at the edge of the mirror disappeared like a phantom, leaving Tyrion and Lucretia with no time to respond. The room grew quiet once more, and neither Lucretia nor Tyrion spoke for several minutes. Finally, Lucretia broke the silence, asking, "Did that really just happen?" Tyrion offered a wry smile and shook his head, confirming, "It wasn't an illusion." "Could you ever have imagined something like this?" "Not in my wildest dreams," Lucretia admitted, her voice tinged with nervousness. "What do you make of it all?" "You mean, do you believe what he just said?" Lucretia asked with a mix of seriousness and concern. "Father mentioned losing most of his memories and having to relearn the world due to the profound influence of subspace. He also said this influence couldn't be fully eradicated but claimed to have regained his senses." "What do you think?" "To be honest, I find it hard to believe everything he said, including regaining his senses," Tyrion replied with a deep voice. "Without further evidence, I'm inclined to suspect a conspiracy related to subspace." "Conspiracies don't exist in subspace," Lucretia countered softly, "only humans perceive such things." "What about a human who's been influenced by subspace?" Tyrion sighed softly before continuing, When chaos in subspace gains consciousness, it becomes more terrifying than pure chaos. However, things may not be as dire as they seem, and we can only hope for a miracle. In the meantime, we must remain vigilant and watch from the sidelines. You, who have served on the border for several years, know the importance of such caution. I understand, Lucretia agreed after a brief pause, then looked back at the oval mirror. Is he really gone? She asked nervously. Tyrion considered for a moment before stepping forward. He removed the oval mirror from its place and laid it face down on the table. This version of father makes me more nervous than ever, the famed pirate muttered. Lucretia's voice came from the crystal ball. It's no surprise you're uneasy after being defeated by him. It must have left a deep impression on you. Tyrion glanced back without expression, replying, let's stay alert. We might suddenly hear father's voice instead of Looney's. The crystal ball abruptly went dark and ceased functioning. In the captain's quarters, Duncan let out a long sigh of relief, reflecting on the recent conversation with the pair of children. Once confident he had accurately remembered the discussion, Duncan took a pen and paper from a nearby surface and started recording the details based on his memory. As he wrote, an unusual hexagonal emblem emerged on the paper, taking shape under his pen strokes. Duncan's hand hesitated as he recognized the symbol forming on the paper unintentionally. It was the same enigmatic emblem Tyrion had shown to Bishop Valentine and Vanna earlier, the mark of the mysterious, ascetics, the true, Duncan, had encountered a century ago. Putting down the pen, Duncan stared thoughtfully at the cryptic hexagon and its fragmented cross structure, wondering where to begin unlocking the emblem's secrets. Suddenly, Duncan's eyes froze, focusing on a specific detail of the emblem. A wet imprint had formed on the edge of the paper as if an invisible stream of water had seeped into the corner. As he continued to observe the damp spot, a faint, blurry line materialized at the center of the mark. Thank you. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Chapter 236 Inches Secret Contact is a local custom. Thank you. A simple phrase, but it made Duncan catch his breath instantly. He was sure that the word hadn't been on the paper earlier, nor was there any sign of it being dampened by water. It had appeared before him out of nowhere. He stared intently at the imprint on the paper, as green flames began to surround him. In a flash, his consciousness swept through the entire ship to verify if there were any uninvited guests on board, but he found nothing. How did this word come to be? Who was sending me a message? Why? To be honest, in that moment, he could somewhat relate to those he had frightened, like Vanna who had done a jump cleave in front of the dressing mirror in a dream, or Tyrion and Lucretia just now. Yet, he still couldn't resist doing the same thing again. The pressing question now was why this word had suddenly appeared on the paper. Duncan's brow furrowed. Then, he recalled a detail. While speaking with Tyrion earlier, he had joked, if the deity behind this church is watching, then they owe me a thank you. Duncan's expression grew pensive. His initial reaction to this thought was that it was too far-fetched. How could such a joke be taken seriously? But after this instinctive response, he couldn't help but further explore this notion, and the more he considered it, the more restless he became. He lowered his gaze to the damp corner of the paper. After hesitating for a moment, he picked up a pen and wrote a few words on the relatively dry edge near the watermark, Storm Goddess. After writing it, he patiently waited, watching the damp area like a commander awaiting a response after pressing the big button. But no reply came, even after the water had nearly evaporated. It seemed the other party had left a message and departed, or maybe they had deliberately left it unread. Duncan's mind raced with absurd and bizarre thoughts. Despite his time in this strange world, the current level of strangeness far exceeded his prior experiences. Even his usually composed mind struggled to hold on. But after waiting for an extended period with no results, he slowly put down the pen and attempted to regain his composure. After contemplating for a moment, he stood up and pushed open the wooden door leading to the chart room. At the navigation table, Goathead continued to stare at the foggy chart, turning its head upon hearing the door open. Did you notice anything unusual on the ship just now? Duncan asked without waiting for Goathead to speak. On the ship, no, nothing out of the ordinary. Goathead replied instinctively, then caught on. Did something happen? I can search the entire ship. No need, I've already checked. I just wanted to confirm with you. Duncan waved his hand, then collected himself and decided not to mention the mysterious writing on the paper. I just saw Tyrion and Lucretia. They happened to be in contact with each other. Goathead sensed that the captain's current state was somewhat odd, but since he didn't elaborate, it wisely refrained from asking. Many people speculate that Tyrion and Lucretia have a distant relationship as siblings. Evidence lies in Tyrion being a pirate in the heart of civilized territory, while his sister is engaged in the great adventure of exploring the borderlands, and they never meet, but now it seems the world's wild guesses are just that, wild guesses. In my view, their relationship remains strong, especially when they confront me together. Their sense of unspoken understanding has been nurtured since childhood when they both suffered at the hands of their father, Duncan said, shaking his head. As for now, they're merely pursuing different paths in life. Ah, the sentimental musings of an old father, Goathead exaggeratedly proclaimed. Are you still communicating effectively with your children? I think it's going well. Duncan thought for a moment and nodded slightly. I believe I have fully expressed my goodwill and partially implanted the notion of reason and returning to humanity in their minds. I have also made some preparations for future interactions. At least the next time we encounter the sea mist, we shouldn't need to engage in a firefight. This is the first step towards a harmonious family. For a moment, Goathead remained silent, which struck Duncan as odd. Why aren't you speaking this time? Aren't you usually quite talkative? Goathead changed to a softer tone, even without an exchange of gunfire. Calling it a harmonious family seems overly optimistic. I find it difficult to assess. Duncan didn't know how to respond and could only shrug in silence. After a moment of quiet, Goathead asked, It sounds like you're already preparing for the next meeting with Tyrion. Why the sudden enthusiasm? Because he once served the Frost Queen, Duncan said lightly, and now, I'm curious about that part of his past. Is it because of Miss Alice? Partly, Duncan replied nonchalantly. He then shook his head, turned around, went back to his room, found the piece of paper he had been scribbling on earlier, and tore off the corner that had revealed the mysterious writing when it became wet. He then returned to the navigation table in the chart room and placed the unusual hexagonal pattern in front of Goathead. Have you seen this before? He inquired. Goathead's neck creaked as it turned to focus on the pattern, then shook its head inquisitively. Never seen it. What is it? You've never seen it. Duncan frowned and only spoke slowly after he was certain that Goathead wasn't hiding anything. Over a century ago, a group of ascetics visited the Vanished, and one of them had an amulet with this pattern on it. Goathead fell silent for a moment, then spoke softly. Oh, then it's beyond my insight. Duncan immediately grasped what the wooden sculpture meant. Back then, Goathead wasn't aboard the Vanished yet because this guy wasn't originally a crew member of the ship. He appeared after the Vanished entered subspace and returned. In truth, he had always been curious about how Goathead ended up on this ship, why it had become the first mate, here after the real Captain Duncan had gone entirely mad, and curious about its connection to subspace and the countless secrets it knew. Unfortunately, Goathead never discussed these matters with him. Even when Duncan attempted to probe the subject, it always changed the topic quite noticeably. This was an attitude and a hint. It couldn't speak, or it would cause significant trouble. Duncan snapped back to reality then, momentarily setting aside his tangled thoughts. After pondering for a while, he nodded at Goathead. You keep steering the ship, I need to handle something. Of course, always at your service. Goathead responded. Duncan put the paper away and turned to walk towards his cabin. However, halfway there, he suddenly heard Goathead's voice behind him. Captain. Duncan stopped in his tracks and turned slightly. You can always trust your loyal first mate. Duncan didn't say anything, but he nodded slightly, then proceeded to his room. Ads by PubFuture, Morris tossed and turned in bed for a while before finally getting up. His wife was still beside him, sleeping peacefully with her light and steady snores punctuating the silence that's brightened by the glow of the world's creation shining through the window. Everything seemed like a dream, yet everything was real. Morris rarely struggled with sleep, but ever since his wife returned, he found himself unable to drift off, and he knew precisely why. Fear. He feared that if he slept, this dreamlike reality would truly become a dream and that all the miracles were merely his own wishful thinking, like 11 years ago when he prayed to subspace and received only a fragile illusion. Driven by this fear, he dared not even pray to Lahem casually. Over the past several years, even though he deliberately distanced himself from the church, he never stopped his daily habit of prayer. But now, because of the subconscious avoidance of the eye of truth, blessing, he even forcibly restrained himself from praying. Morris took a deep breath, allowing his slightly foggy mind to awaken in the cool night air. He then got up, put on a coat, and silently stood beside the bed, watching his sleeping wife. He had been doing this for the past couple of days. But this time, after only a short while of watching, he suddenly felt a momentary confusion in his mind, followed by a vague call and an indistinct majestic figure appearing in his thoughts. Morris immediately shuddered and realized what had occurred. The captain was calling him. The elderly scholar took 2 deep breaths, fully awakening, and quickly walked to the storeroom connected to the master bedroom. He turned on the light in the storeroom and looked at an antique mirror placed in the corner. The mirror's edge was slowly engulfed by ethereal ghost flames, and the captain's figure gradually materialized within it. For some reason, what should have been a scene that terrified ordinary people filled Morris with an inexplicable sense of calm. He found a sense of reality in the floating flames and the majestic figure. Just as pain can prove one is alive, they confirmed that a miracle had indeed occurred, and that all the evidence before him was genuine. Morris approached the antique mirror and slightly bowed his head. "Captain, what are your orders?" Duncan saw Morris in the cluttered room behind him, momentarily imagining a middle-aged salaryman sneaking into the storage room to play games, fearing his wife's discovery. The next instant, he composed his face, brushed aside the unsuitable association, and spoke seriously to Morris. "I need you to investigate something that may be related to history or a secret organization." "What kind of thing?" Morris inquired. "A mysterious pattern found on the amulet of a group of ascetics." Chapter 237, People with Insomnia. The flames in the mirror vanished, and the majestic figure gradually faded into the darkness, but the mysterious symbol that Captain Duncan showed him remained vivid in Morris's mind. Morris left the storeroom and glanced at his sleeping wife before heading to the writing desk under the window. He took out a pen and paper and carefully sketched the peculiar symbol from memory using the bright, cold night light from outside. Afterward, the learned scholar furrowed his brow as he examined the pattern on the paper. Even scholars who had aced the most challenging exams at the Truth Academy would be baffled by this symbol. Morris could only be certain that it was not a symbol used by any cult, church, or official organization, nor did it adhere to the runes and symbols of mysticism. According to the captain, this emblem had been carried by several ascetics who visited the vanished a century ago, and he had suddenly taken an interest in it. As the captain's kin, Morris had no intention of delving into the captain's secrets, but he was immensely curious about these enigmatic ascetics. What kind of people would bear such an unusual charm and suddenly pique Captain Duncan's interest a century later? After contemplating for some time, Morris exhaled and carefully locked the paper in the writing desk's drawer. He planned to visit the study the next morning to peruse books about ancient cities and secret societies. Although the God of Wisdom had granted him an exceptional memory, there were still gaps, and perhaps he had a record of this symbol in his own library. Then if he couldn't find any clues in his library, he would search the city's major libraries and the Upper City University archives. Though he had left his university position years ago, his connections and influence remained, and borrowing rare books wouldn't be an issue. And if worse came to worse that there were no records in all of Plant, he would write letters or send telegrams to old friends in Lanza and other places who were well versed in history and mysticism. Even if they couldn't help, their universities and research institutions could. In any case, this was the first task the captain had entrusted him, and he had granted him the miracle of resurrection. The least he could do was offer some assistance. As Morris silently mulled over this, his insomnia-stricken mind unknowingly settled. He seemed to rediscover the spirited enthusiasm he had when he first entered the academy, imbued with determination for a specific goal. And with this resolve, his long-lost drowsiness returned. Tyrion had been restlessly tossing and turning in bed for several hours, still unable to sleep. He couldn't recall the last time he experienced such severe insomnia. As the commander of the Sea Mist fleet and the captain of the Sea Mist itself, he had always maintained strong self-control and healthy sleep habits. He could fall asleep and wake up like clockwork, except for today. Various thoughts and images rose and fell in his mind, interwoven with countless faded, trivial memories. The flames in the mirror, his somber and imposing father, the exploration ship setting sail amid cheers and praises, the ship's silhouette returning from subspace. Even the battle against the vanished and the Frost Queen's words to him when the Abyss plan was launched. There are terrifying things beneath the deep sea, but all the answers must lie beneath it as well. Tyrion sat up in bed, turning over. He glanced at the nearby wall, where the mirror that once hung lay upside down on a table. A light oval mark remained on the wall, and the case containing the crystal ball and lens set was placed at the foot of the bed, locked up once more. Meanwhile, other parts of the room with mirrors or smooth surfaces were covered with cloth. However, those white cloths draped over the mirrors only made the room seem eerier and more sinister. In the cold light of the world's creation, the room appeared to be a gathering place for ghosts. But Tyrion wasn't afraid of ghosts. He had a crew of undead sailors, a cursed living battleship, and several secret bases prone to strange and frightening illusions. Compared to his father, ghosts were hardly frightening. After pacing in the quiet and unsettling room for a few minutes, Tyrion's gaze fell on the handheld case at the foot of the bed. After some hesitation, he picked it up. Hurley had already flown back to the ship to report. As the captain, Tyrion couldn't very well go to the next room to wake up his subordinates and play cards to pass the time, so he decided to see what Lucretia was doing. Perhaps she was experiencing insomnia like him. He turned on the electric light, placed the case on the table, and opened the lid. The crystal ball, surrounded by complex lenses and curved connecting arms, was revealed. Tyrion reached out, but before he could activate the lens, the device buzzed, and the central crystal ball quickly lit up. After a moment, Lucretia's figure appeared in the crystal ball. The Sea Witch, dressed in a veil with black hair cascading over her shoulders and exuding a mysterious aura, looked at her brother with a weary expression. "Brother, I can't sleep. If you can't sleep, you can find your dolls to pass the time, or do your magic experiments," Tyrion said sternly. "I'm in the middle of planning the future development of the Sea Mist fleet." "But your hair looks like you've been rolling around on your pillow for 4 hours," Lucretia said calmly. "Is this the new posture for planning development?" Quote. Tyrion fell silent for a few seconds, looking exhausted. "Do you have any good suggestions for treating insomnia? Use your witch knowledge. Forget it, pretend I didn't ask." The two siblings lapsed into an awkward silence, but gradually, the conversation inevitably shifted towards a specific topic. "I made some modifications to Looney earlier," said Lucretia. "I strengthened her joint protection and added a small container for storing holy oil and protective runes next to the soul sphere. Do you think that can stop Father from contacting you through Nilu again?" "No, but maybe it can prevent Looney from directly attacking me next time," Lucretia said, a hint of helplessness in her tone. "She actually still has lingering fears from the last time she attacked me. We discussed it seriously just now." "What did you discuss with your puppet?" Tyrion asked curiously. "She advised me not to be nervous, and I advised her to be more open-minded." They fell silent again, but not for long. "Actually, I was thinking about something just now," Tyrion suddenly said. "What were you thinking about? Do you remember Father's last words today?" Tyrion went slowly. He said he found Looney's sister, Nilu, and that the doll had never been sold. Lucretia's expression shifted uncomfortably. "What are you getting at?" "This means that the doll shop is still there. Do you remember the location of the doll shop in Planned?" Tyrion's expression grew serious. "I only remember that it's in the city." Lucretia frowned as she tried to recall, while Tyrion continued, "If Father really bought Nilu from that doll shop, it reveals a vital piece of information. He had already visited this city before it was historically tainted in some way, and even acted openly here. Have you considered that Father deliberately gave us this clue to investigate?" Lucretia suddenly asked. "Now that you've thought of this possibility, maybe it's what Father intended for you to look into." "I have considered this possibility." Tyrion paused for a few seconds before speaking again. "But even so, you know I won't ignore this clue." "I vaguely remember the shop's location," Lucretia said. "It should be on the edge of the upper city, near an intersection in the southern lower city. The shop owner is an elf lady. I saw her a century ago, and she looked quite old, but considering the lifespan of elves, she should still be the owner of the shop now." Tyrion nodded slightly, silently noting the information provided by Lucretia. The sea began to stir slightly, and the Vanished swayed gently in the waves. Duncan sat at the navigation table, studying the mist-covered map in front of him with some boredom. His physical body and plan had already fallen asleep, but this, original body, on the Vanished hardly needed rest. As a result, night sailing had become a somewhat dull affair, especially with the double restrictions of not being able to read at night or at sea. He couldn't even bring the entertainment books he bought in plan to pass the time here, making this boredom even more acute. After all, he couldn't treat exploring this ship as a pastime every day. No matter how large the Vanished was, there was a limit to its exploration. I'm almost tempted to wander around the spirit realm and knock on Vanna and Tyrion's glass to invite them to play cards, Duncan sighed, feeling bored. But with Vanna, it's hard to say, and Tyrion probably won't be able to sleep tonight. If you really do that, he'll be sleepless tomorrow night too, Goathead immediately said. But honestly, your idea is quite appealing, with a mix of horror and entertainment value. Who do you plan to knock on first? I was just joking. Duncan glanced at Goathead, then returned his gaze to the map. But suddenly, he seemed to remember something and raised his head abruptly. How long until sunrise? About 3 hours if it rises on time, Goathead estimated roughly. Chapter 238 Inches Tracking of the Bright Star. In another 3 hours, the sun was expected to rise from the distant horizon, bringing the relatively safe and stable daylight to replace the unsettling darkness of night, if the sun indeed rose as anticipated. Duncan glanced at the nearby mechanical clock, its hands ticking steadily. Do you plan to wait for the sunrise? Goathead's voice suddenly inquired. There are still 3 hours left. Waiting idly for 3 hours is even more tedious than sitting here, staring at a mostly empty map, Duncan replied, shaking his head. He stood up to stretch his shoulders and slowly walked towards the bedroom. I'll rest for a bit. If I don't come out before the sunrise, wake me up. Of course, Captain. Duncan nodded, returned to the bedroom, and casually tossed the paper with the mysterious emblem on the table before heading towards the nearby bed. Though his body hardly required rest, he would occasionally take a short nap before dawn, not to relieve fatigue, but simply to wake up and greet the sunrise. November LBJNN. This practice allowed him to maintain a sense of being alive on the Vanished, preventing him from losing his humanity on this ghost ship. He didn't know if there was a hidden danger in this regard, but ever since realizing that the Vanished's condition was not as stable as he had initially thought, he consciously maintained this habit of living a human life on the ship. Duncan lay down, closed his eyes, listened to the whispers of the waves, felt the gentle rocking of the ship beneath him, and gradually relaxed. In the captain's bedroom of the Bright Star, adorned with a feminine touch, Lucretia, wearing a silky nightgown, suddenly sat up in bed. Her hair slightly disheveled, her expression weary and irritable, she clutched a half-human-sized, comically shaped yet eerily unsettling giant rabbit doll as she got up. Ads by PubFuture. The doll, made of pink and blue fabric, had a scar across its face and a saw-toothed mouth painted with a blood-like, eerie red. As Lucretia rose, the rabbit doll shifted slightly, then turned its head. Its button eyes gazed at its mistress, and a little girl's voice emerged from its cotton-filled body. Mistress, I thought you had managed to fall asleep. Lucretia glanced at the nearby clock and spoke with a hint of annoyance. I slept for a few minutes, only to be awakened by a strange dream. What time is it now? 2 hours before sunrise, the rabbit doll said, hopping out of her arms and onto the floor. It bounced over to a cabinet, opened the door with its seemingly floppy plush paw, retrieved a bottle of the captain's prized wine, poured a small glass, and handed it to Lucretia. You can still sleep for a while. This will help calm your nerves. Lucretia downed the glass but still rose. No need, lying down will only add to my irritation. Start tidying up. Very well, mistress. The rabbit doll, speaking in a little girl's voice, responded crisply. It took the wine glass from its mistress and put it away, then hopped and bounced around to tidy up the bed, seemingly skilled and efficient. Meanwhile, Lucretia snapped her fingers, and the room's lights turned on. She took a slow breath, dragged her feet to the dressing table, and tapped a drawer under the mirror with her fingernail, causing it to open in response. A wooden toy sailor, carved from wood, leapt out, adorned in a classic naval uniform and clutching a small command knife. He first bowed to Lucretia, then stood atop the drawer, waving his command knife and issuing sharp orders. A large group of toy soldiers emerged from the drawer, quickly forming ranks and calling out names before running to the side to pick up a comb, hand mirror, water cup, and toothbrush. They swiftly and nimbly lined up, moving to Lucretia's side or the back of her chair, and commenced assisting her with her morning grooming. Lucretia sat dispiritedly in front of the dressing table, allowing the dolls to bustle around her as she grappled with the fatigue and stress induced by a sleepless night and rampant thoughts. She contemplated matters concerning the vanished, and after some time, she inhaled deeply, forcing her mind to regain clarity. At that moment, a faint golden gleam suddenly streamed in from the gap in the curtains nearby, catching the sea witch's attention. Lucretia noticed the golden gleam, initially unresponsive, but after a mere 2 or 3 seconds, her eyes abruptly narrowed, and she glanced up at the mechanical clock beside her. There was still an hour until sunrise. Ads by PubFuture. It wasn't time for the sun to rise. She abruptly stood up. The toy soldiers momentarily fell into disarray, then efficiently commenced cleaning up and reassembling their ranks. The rabbit doll, having already tidied the bed, observed her mistress's movement and hopped over. "Mistress, it appears to be getting light outside." "It isn't time for daylight yet," Lucretia responded quickly, striding towards the window. "Where are we now?" "We're still following the course set last night," the rabbit doll answered promptly. "We're already close to where the big thing is supposed to have fallen." As soon as the rabbit doll finished speaking, Lucretia flung open the thick curtains and thrust open the window, reinforced with a fine metal mesh. A thin, hazy fog lingered on the sea surface outside the window, a common sight in the border area. Within that thin, hazy fog, a vast, faint golden glow floated quietly on the sea surface, its distance from the bright star still uncertain. A massive, glowing object floated on the sea surface. Lucretia gazed intently in that direction, inhaling deeply, and her body suddenly transformed into a whirl of colorful paper fragments. The colorful fragments swept out the window, soaring across the deck, through the stairs, and into the cockpit situated in the upper middle part of the ship. Inside the cockpit, the clockwork puppet Looney, dressed as a maid, was navigating the ship. She instantly sensed her mistress's approach, and as the colorful paper fragments flew in, she relinquished the steering wheel. The following second, Lucretia's figure materialized from the paper fragments and took control of the wheel. "Mistress, I was about to send someone to summon you," Looney said, stepping aside. "That golden light suddenly emerged from the fog, and it appears to be the fallen object we've been tracking. Increase to full speed, have everyone on standby, and prepare the rear of the ship for entering the spirit world at any time," Lucretia commanded swiftly. "Do we have enough spirit dust and magic oil reserves?" Looney responded promptly. "Reserves are sufficient, and your orders have been relayed." Lucretia nodded, and then the bright star sprang to life at the captain's command. A large number of clockwork sailors, magical dolls, and ceramic soldiers hastened to their respective workstations. The specially designed paddle wheel structures on both sides of the ship started spinning faster, and the seemingly outdated engine gradually unleashed power surpassing that of modern propeller engines, rapidly increasing the ship's speed. In the rear half of the ship, the ghostly, original hull became more ethereal and blurred, with black hair-like stripes extending from the stern to the surrounding waters. From a distance, it appeared as if a dark tail trailed behind the bright star. Under Lucretia's direct control, the entire ship showcased a blend of magic and machinery, a fusion of beautiful elegance and terrifying grotesqueness. As the bright star's speed further increased, the enormous golden glowing mass floating amidst the mist and the sea became increasingly apparent to Lucretia. The true scale of the object grew more immense as well. Even the clockwork doll Looney gradually widened her eyes and couldn't help but utter in a low voice, "My goodness, mistress, what is that?" Lucretia didn't respond, but continued to stare intently ahead, concentrating on the massive golden apparition emerging from the mist, now resembling a small mountain. It was too colossal to discern its complete outline from a single perspective, and its majestic, flawless appearance seemed beyond human construction. A vast, intricate golden geometric body silently floated on the sea's surface, emitting a soft, alluring pale golden light. It was nearly 3 times the height of the tallest mast of the bright star, with walls extending on both sides. The upper half of the structure leaned slightly outward, like a terrifying cliff, and its surface bore no visible protrusions, appearing entirely natural. As they approached, Lucretia and Looney began to notice more details of the colossal object. "It looks semi-transparent." Looney curiously leaned against the wide viewing window, It looks like a glowing piece of colored glass. No, it seems to be more than just transparent. Lucretia shook her head, her eyes unwaveringly fixed on the enormous glowing geometric body. It seemed as though she had detected something unusual about the edges of the structure when a small black dot suddenly emerged from the nearby mist and entered her field of vision. It was a seabird. Even in the vast ocean and even in this border filled with strange phenomena, such creatures persisted. If anything, these wild animals, lacking the complex intelligence of humans, fared better in the bizarre border seas than the brave and strong adventurers. Lucretia's attention shifted to the seabird, which appeared to be disoriented by the golden light on the sea surface and frantically flew straight towards the glowing mountain. However, the next moment, the anticipated tragic collision did not transpire. The bird flew directly into the slightly tilted cliff. After a while, from the corner of Lucretia's eye, she saw the bird re-emerge from another direction, seemingly unscathed. Looney also witnessed this scene and was taken aback. Is it an illusion? Chapter 239 Inches Falling Object. The bright star's speed gradually decreased, eventually coming to a cautious stop hundreds of meters away from the faintly glowing, semi-transparent cliff. However, in comparison to the colossal scale of the structure, a distance of hundreds of meters seemed insignificant. Visually, Looney felt as if the bright star had drawn near to the cliff. The impressive geometric structure, resembling a towering mountain, loomed with an overwhelming presence that could easily overwhelm and suffocate an ordinary person standing there. It's truly magnificent, the clockwork doll couldn't help but exclaim, looking up, and beautiful. Indeed, it was both magnificent and beautiful. If one could overlook its oddity, it might even be considered a wondrous sight, capable of inspiring a great masterpiece from a talented artist or countless poems from a poet. It looked like a peak sculpted from pale golden, translucent amber with sharp angles or an exceptionally regular geometric iceberg. Emitting a hazy golden light, it floated in the water, encircled by a thin, slowly drifting mist that lent it a dreamy aura. Various signs suggested that it was indeed dreamlike. It lacked a physical form, despite its apparent existence. It seemed more like a giant shadow. Mistress, Looney couldn't help but turn around. What do you think this is? I don't know. I only know that it fell from the sky. Lucretia admitted her lack of knowledge. She remembered the scene when the bright star first tracked this object. Just 2 days prior, during the last hours of daylight, the bright star observed a massive, hazy, glowing body suddenly falling from the sky, tearing through the clouds, and disappearing into the depths of the border seas. From that moment on, she and her ship had been pursuing this object. However, aside from the evident fact that it had fallen from the sky, she knew nothing about this phantom-like celestial visitor. Lucretia carefully observed the base of the massive geometric structure, confirming another fact. It was incredibly light, floating on the surface of the sea with only its lower half slightly submerged in the water. This slight submersion indicated that the seemingly illusory object possessed some mass and wasn't merely a shadow. Possessing mass meant it could be bound by physical materials. Could they use the bright star's power to tow this object away? Could they bring it back to the civilized world's territory and assemble a truly professional team to study it? The Explorers Association would probably be eager to help. While it may work in theory, the practicality of this idea remained uncertain. How could they transport such a massive, penetrable illusion? Or was there a solid core within the glowing geometric structure that provided its mass? As Lucretia quickly pondered these thoughts, Looney's voice rang beside her. Shall we investigate its interior? Let's proceed cautiously, Lucretia said, biting her finger and drawing a drop of blood. The blood drifted forward and suddenly burst into an exaggerated puff of smoke. When the smoke cleared, another, Lucretia, appeared in the control room, like a ghostly illusion, wearing a pale, tattered dress, her face cold and gloomy, and her body semi-transparent, hovering in midair. Lucretia nodded at the illusion, which then silently turned around and flew toward the mountain, hundreds of meters away. Looney watched this scene nervously, witnessing the ghostly illusion swiftly cross the foggy sea surface and silently vanish into the mountain. But nothing special happened. Mistress, Looney turned to her master. What's inside? Light and warmth fill the space, neither scorching hot nor blindingly bright. There is an absence of wind or waves inside, and the sea below appears even calmer than the outside, Lucretia said slowly, carefully processing the information from her phantom clone. For now, at least the shallow area of the mountain seems safe. I'm moving further inward. Looney nodded. Although she was a clockwork doll, her soul was closer to human than any crew member on the ship. At this moment, her nervousness increased, and she reached behind herself to wind her key a few times, using this method to alleviate the slight tremors in her body caused by tension. After waiting for some time, she suddenly saw her mistress's expression change. Lucretia furrowed her brow and looked forward. I've reached the deepest part, said the sea witch. There is a core. A core. What does it look like? A massive stone sphere, Lucretia said with a somewhat puzzled expression, or at least it appears to be made of stone. It's grayish-white, with many regular grooves on the surface, about 10 meters in diameter, floating above the sea. As she spoke, Lucretia furrowed her brow and concentrated, as if issuing a command to the ghostly apparition that had already ventured deep into the glowing geometric structure. She continued, it can be touched. It's solid. Solid. Looney paused, her years of experience with her mistress quickly helping her understand. You want to bring it back. The elven scholars in Wind Harbor should be interested in this, Lucretia said calmly. The patterns on the surface of the stone sphere display an obvious regularity, suggesting a complex geometric structure. I suspect those proficient in mathematics may discern something from it. How are we going to drag this thing back? Looney looked at her mistress, somewhat bewildered. With a sturdy rope or chain. We have spare anchor cables on the ship, but they might not be long enough. The projection of the glowing body is too large, and the distance from here to its core may exceed the limit of the anchor cable. Lucretia silently stared at the glowing mountain, and seemed to make up her mind after half a minute. We'll go in and pull it out ourselves. Are you serious? My curiosity is piqued. All right, you're serious. Duncan slept in the captain's quarters of the Vanished, experiencing a brief and peculiar dream. This was remarkable, as his body scarcely required sleep, let alone dreaming. In fact, since he came aboard this ship, he had never experienced a dream. He had some fragmented dreams in Plan's body, but none were as clear and memorable as this short, strange dream. In the dream, he saw a meteor, one that appeared suddenly during the day. N-O-V-E-L-B-J-N.C. He stood at the bow of the Vanished, and the ship was quiet. He could not hear the noise of the goat head in his mind, nor the daily commotion of Alice battling with the bucket and mop on the deck, and even the entire boundless sea was silent, with no waves or wind. The whole world seemed to have fallen into silence, and in this quietude, massive glowing objects fell from the sky, also silent. One after another, luminous objects fell, gently landing on the placid surface of the boundless sea. Despite their massive size, they created no disturbances, as if they were phantoms falling upon one another. Gradually, the objects descended like rain, transforming into a terrifying and peculiar meteor shower. Countless glowing objects filled the sea, enveloping the Vanished in a sea of brilliance. As the numerous luminous objects continued to fall, the sky gradually darkened. By the end of the dream, the meteor shower had dwindled, leaving the sky pitch black. Duncan lifted his head at the dream's conclusion, only to be met with a dark red, blotchy, and frightening void in the sky, reminiscent of a dying eye silently observing the world. Duncan's eyes snapped open, the vivid and bizarre dream leaving a strong impression on his mind. He was amazed that he could dream aboard the ship, even more so by the strange scenes his dream presented. A quiet world, silent meteors, a dark and lifeless sky, and the terrifying void like a dying eye gazing upon the world. Why did he dream of such peculiar sights? What did this dream symbolize? Duncan slowly caught his breath, sitting up in bed and rubbing his forehead in irritation. On the eerie boundless sea, aboard the Vanished, he couldn't accept that the dream was just ordinary. Something must have influenced him, or his intuition sensed something, prompting the dream's scene. As he pondered in frustration, his brow furrowed. Did it have any connection to the world countdown he had recently learned about? Was it related to the truth about the world's end that Captain Duncan, who had gone mad a century ago, had faced? Had learning this information triggered the dream, or had the residual memories of this body suddenly stirred? Was his interaction with Tyrion and Lucretia linked to the dream? Duncan gently tapped his forehead and reached for the bottle of alcohol on the side cabinet, intending to use its power to calm his emotions. However, as he extended his hand, his gaze fell upon the nearby wall clock, and he paused. The clock's hands had stopped. They had come to a halt 1 minute before sunrise. The darkness outside the window was not illuminated by the break of dawn or the cold radiance of the world's creation. The oil lamp's flame in the bedroom was the only living thing, still burning steadily, but its light appeared somewhat dim, casting a peculiar glow throughout the room. Duncan's gaze calmly surveyed the scene, taking in all the abnormal occurrences. The situation was clearly not normal. Was he still dreaming? He quickly dismissed this possibility. His clear consciousness allowed him to discern whether he was dreaming. Suppressing the urge to open the window and investigate the situation outside the ship, Duncan got up and headed for the bedroom door. His first destination was the chart room to see if Goathead knew what was happening. Upon opening the door to the chart room, he looked at the navigation table where the sea chart and Goathead should have been. The wooden sculpture was missing. Chapter 240 inches. There is a breathtaking view. The Goathead was nowhere to be found. This sight was even more astonishing than that absurd and surreal dream. Duncan stood at the doorway, dumbfounded for a while before finally regaining his composure. He promptly drew his sword from his waist and cautiously advanced. True enough, the Goathead had vanished. The familiar navigation table only had a sea chart and a few assorted items on it, while the spot where the Goathead should have been was merely an empty table. Duncan stared at the empty table for a few seconds before slowly looking around. His eyes met more incongruous scenes. All the furnishings were aged and worn, with cracks of varying depths appearing on the walls and pillars. Numerous items were absent from the shelves, leaving them almost bare. A dark, dubious stain had replaced a decorative tapestry that once hung on one wall, beside a grimy window. The view outside was dim and disordered, with faint, evasive flashes of light occasionally visible. It was as if swift-moving shadows were rapidly darting through the air outside the window. The entire chart room felt as though it had been deserted for innumerable years. Time had damaged most of the furnishings, while some unknown, even more hazardous force had left irregular, dark stains on the walls, ceiling, and floor. Duncan couldn't help but pinch his thigh again, attempting to verify whether he was dreaming or not. The sharp pain and clear thoughts reassured him that this was not a dream but a reality that felt foreign. The sensation of stepping foot on the vanished for the first time resurfaced, as the tension of being surrounded by boundless peculiarity caused Duncan's brow to furrow. However, compared to his initial experience on the ship, it took him only a brief moment to adjust and regain his composure after taking a few deep breaths. After all, he now had numerous bizarre encounters he never could have imagined in his previous life. His cumulative experience dealing with this strange world and the proficiency and confidence in his own abilities meant he was no longer the disoriented beginner he had once been. The only thing causing him unease now was the concern that the vanished being unstable and destined for issues seemed to be materializing. Something had transpired on the ship. Duncan walked around the room again, inspecting the now vacant shelves, the grimy walls, and the corner where two wooden crates used to be. Most items had disappeared, and aside from the navigation table, the room had become an old, decrepit empty space. But one thing remained in its original position, the oval mirror with an ornate floral patterned frame. Duncan approached the mirror and cautiously peered into it. Nothing horrifying materialized. The mirror didn't reflect a gory inferno or twisted faces, it was merely filthy. Dark stains covered the surface, but in areas with less dirt, reflections were still discernible. Duncan didn't linger in front of the mirror for long. He returned to the navigation table and examined the sea chart. The next moment, his gaze abruptly froze. The sea chart had altered. The fog that had almost entirely obscured the map had disappeared, unveiling precise and intricate navigation routes on the parchment. Duncan instinctively leaned in closer to make out the contents of the map, but he immediately realized something was amiss. The paths on the map intersected, with overlapping navigation routes, but there were no meaningful labels or locations. It seemed like a disorganized tangle of lines drawn haphazardly, documenting a confused sleepwalk. Among the lines, there were no islands or city-states, nothing. He couldn't find Planned, Lanza, Cold Harbor, or Wind Harbor. Although he was admittedly unfamiliar with most of the names of these city-states, he at least knew they existed and should definitely be present on this sea chart now that the fog had cleared. Duncan's brow furrowed deeper as he realized there were no reference points on the sea chart. He slowly straightened up, tilting his ears to listen for sounds outside the window. Ads by PubFuture. There was no sound beyond the window, no wind or waves, silent, just like his peculiar, brief nightmare. The lines on the sea chart indicated the vanished's trajectory, which would update itself as the ship drifted. So the lines marked on this fog-free, intersecting sea chart, were the records of the vanished's voyage in which dimension. Duncan took a gentle breath, and as if making a decision, he held his sword and turned to walk towards the captain's cabin door. In theory, the deck of the vanished was just beyond the door. He gripped the handle, took a deep breath, and pushed the door open. The vanished was sailing in a dark chaos, and the deck and structures on the ship were in ruins, long abandoned. At least, the deck of the vanished was indeed outside the door. Duncan stepped out of the door, treading on the pitted and damaged deck that seemed on the brink of collapse, hearing the harsh creaking sound that suddenly shattered the stifling silence. Duncan cautiously advanced, making sure the deck was only seemingly broken but not truly at risk of collapsing, and then he walked a bit more boldly. He then raised his head to assess the situation surrounding the vanished. What he saw was a vast and infinite chaotic space filled with desolation, dim shadows everywhere, and among those shadows, dark and indistinct light and shadow turbulence would occasionally emerge and gradually fade away. From time to time, peculiar flashes or light streams would suddenly brighten, illuminating the void in the distance like blind lightning. In that fleeting moment of brightness, one could vaguely see something enormous floating in the void, as if slowly rotating and contorting. Upon witnessing those dark shadows and turbulent flashes, the only thought in Duncan's mind was, "Holy crap." This scene seemed familiar. It was the same as the view beneath the vanished. It was subspace. Duncan almost cursed out loud, his mouth twitching twice, thinking that the thing he dreaded the most was bound to happen. He had recently considered avoiding contact with the mysterious and seemingly alluring subspace, but he never anticipated that he would suddenly experience subspace drift with the blink of an eye. How did he end up here? However, after the initial panic, he quickly composed himself and restrained the urge to return to the captain's cabin. N.O.V.L.B. in.com. He couldn't yet determine if this place was truly subspace, he only felt that it resembled the view outside the bottom of the vanished. And if this place were indeed subspace, then retreating back into the captain's cabin would be futile. In addition to this point, he also quickly noticed something peculiar about his own situation. He stood here, observing the scenery of subspace suspected without experiencing any discomfort, nor did he feel his spirit being eroded, or hearing any strange noises, but according to the common sense of this world, shouldn't humans go mad just by glimpsing subspace, let alone entering it? But he hadn't felt any discomfort. Not only did he not feel any discomfort, but he could still clearly perceive his body and plant, as well as the imprints of Nina, Morris, and Vanna, who remained in the real dimension. Even if he, the ghost captain, had some unique properties and some resistance to subspace, he shouldn't have been so unaffected here, should he? Duncan was baffled by his current state and even began to question whether this place was really the legendary abyss of World's End. He then steadied himself and walked towards the railing at the edge of the deck. As expected, there was no water beneath the vanished. The ship seemed to be floating in the universe, enveloped by the same void on all sides. Standing at the edge of the deck, he gazed at the distant, indistinct, colossal shadows and the occasional bursts of light, carefully contemplating how to escape this predicament. First, he needed to determine if this place was genuinely subspace, and secondly, find and establish if there was still a connection between this place and the real dimension. Since he had arrived here, it meant that there must be a place to reconnect with the real world, but this place might not be in the bedroom where he woke up. He had already examined the bedroom and the chart room, and found no signs of a passage. After a moment of thought, he had a rough idea and turned away from the ship's side, heading towards the cabin entrance in the middle of the deck. Just then, something caught Duncan's attention, and he instinctively stopped. He looked up in the direction of the faint light, and a slightly brighter arc of electricity was slowly dissipating in the darkness. In the gradually dimming light, it seemed as if something enormous was slowly drifting above the vanished. Duncan watched intently as another flash appeared at that moment, like a winding and relentless lightning bolt, illuminating a vast expanse of sky in an instant. Duncan finally saw the massive object's outline, his breath caught in his throat. It was a piece of land, or a land-like fragment of shadow, of immense proportions, large enough to invoke a fear of gigantic objects. Its irregular outline resembled something ripped from a planet by some immense force, then violently hurled here. On that suspended land, one could faintly discern mountains, rivers, and some more dubious, disquieting lines and shapes, all lacking color and life. The entire continent was a monochrome gray-black, with rivers frozen in the gorges of the earth, making it resemble a coarse, colorless model, sealed in unchanging amber. This vast celestial wreckage slowly moved above the vanished, presenting Duncan with a desolate, ancient vision of an apocalypse.